Pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to films I should have talked about years ago. And, well, here comes yet another grandiose example of a film that I was able to see on Netflix over the years. And, well, out of all films that I've talked about, this one tends to go, let's say, a bit overseas, particularly in Northeast Asia. I'm, of course, talking about a film from Korea. Train to Busan. And this film in particular is actually quite unique. For the most part, even though it's one of those things that many people may not understand, mostly in terms of how dialogue is put into play. The natural Korean language that's put into play here does not necessarily throw people off in the right direction, but sometimes, well, it doesn't really do so well. Not everybody's a big fan of most films that are usually in different dubs, but of course in this particular example I don't really seem to mind the dubs because guess what? This film does come standard with subtitles that were easy to understand for me when I first saw this film. But I've definitely seen a lot of Korean films out there other than this, of course, as far back as well. 2006 with The Host. I mean, that was an amazing film at the time. Kind of underrated, but you know, it is what it is. Train to Busan is definitely one of those. And much more recent times, in early 2020, we got Parasite, which was at the time one of the best that we've ever had so far, whether Korean or otherwise. But Train to Busan is one of those that has certainly got quite a bit of attention on Netflix over the years, and I will say that's certainly not a surprise. This film has a lot of amazing quirks to it. It's basically one of those kinds of films, zombie apocalypse films, and I have talked quite a bit about some of them out there. Well, probably the most recent case that we've got so far was another Netflix original called Army of the Dead, which was released in summer 2021, so earlier this year. Not too recent, but still. I've already talked about that as a little bonus featurette for this series, and as a matter of fact, there actually might be others down the line, other bonus episodes I might have to work on. But anyways, Train to Busan is basically a zombie apocalypse film, but the real premise about this that makes it different from many others, that sets alongside a lot of the typical things that take place with zombie apocalypse films these days, is that it's centered on a group of survivors on a train to Busan. As simple as that plot seems to be, the title does seem to say it all for us. So it almost feels like that we shouldn't not even watch this film to begin with. But basically, in case you are one of those that has not seen the film, like me, then well, I might as well go ahead and explain the whole entire thing about it. So it begins with a family, pretty much. A family that's in, well, separate areas inside Korea, but then eventually a zombie outbreak takes place. And the zombies are out to munch on whatever kinds of human living flesh that they can possibly find. And man, if you aren't very familiar with the concept of how modern day zombies can actually run like most of us, well, you're probably missing out on a lot, because this definitely ain't like the Romero era where zombies are slow-moving, walking corpses that can limp around and, well, have a lot of weaknesses to them, because today we see a lot of strengths in them, way more than we used to. And also they're much more terrifying by the looks of it because of a lot of Oscar-winning effects, and also because of some rather terrifying sound design made by a lot of Foley engineers out there. I tell you, these guys know what they're doing. They do very serious work on all of this stuff these days. Zombie movies are definitely one of the greatest that we could possibly have these days. And it sure is the reason why Army of the Dead is quite a, well, not so awesome, but anyways. The main difference here is that with Train to Busan, of course it's in Korea, and it's set on a train. But the real thing about this is the fact that, well, it's one of those kinds of films Like a lot of media out there that's centered on survival of the fittest, the group of main characters that's situated here are certainly one of a kind. It almost kind of reminds me of many other things out there, like with Transformers Prime, where that entire series, Autobots are trying their best to basically survive on Earth and fight against the Decepticon army, but slowly but surely we would see numbers of Autobots pretty much go down every now and then. And it's also kind of like with Jurassic Park, where the amount of survivors would eventually start dwindling down to a minimum pretty much. But in the end, a certain amount manages to escape. In this exact film, we pretty much have that same old principle where survival of the fittest is played every step of the way. I don't just mean with every hour that passes by throughout the film's plot and all that good stuff. I mean every single minute. First thing you probably would guess is that the train that's on its way to the safe haven in a quarantine zone ends up getting overrun by zombies. And then every now and then, zombies would go through car after car inside of that train and pretty much attack anyone who's still alive. And I tell you, the gritty, horrifying details in this film are certainly one to be desired. And I mean ones to be desired for sure. Because it all goes down to the point where in the very climax, our main protagonist is pretty much out there trying to protect the rest of the family, but it eventually is forced to take a few zombies out by simply jumping off the train. Now, that is very surprising indeed. That's quite a twist. The main protagonist goes as far to rescue the family that's trapped on the engine by all sorts of horrifying undead creatures that are out to kill them all, by simply making a heroic sacrifice, jumping off of the locomotive right then and there. Right at the very ending, the final segment of the entire film where the train eventually comes to a stop and our main hero jumps off the train. Oh man, that is crazy. But you know what? I've seen a lot worse in a way. I feel like that's quite a twist right there that, well, honestly, I really don't like to see where the main protagonist actually dies like that. Goes ahead and makes a heroic sacrifice. I mean, it's kind of like with some other franchises out there, like when you take a look at Dragon Ball Z, for example, where Goku basically transports a near-dead Cell over to King Kai's planet where they get blown up and Goku pretty much dies for good. Like, that's something that I was pretty disappointed with at the time, but I do see a lot of reasons why that was a bit more fitting than I originally thought about it. But in this case, because I'm not very familiar with this kind of canon in general, I still am quite a big fan of most zombie films and a lot of other different franchises in general, but in this case, I just don't necessarily know how I'm able to cope with it. Because our main hero, that, well, you pretty much care for all this time. I mean, this film goes as far as to ensure that you cheer for this guy, and you cheer for, I mean, it does whatever you can possibly think of. Like, I mean, there's a lot of disappointments that I have seen, but this one's probably something different, the way I see it. And I don't really want to go as far as to say that it might hurt my overall score when I'm giving the score to this thing, because, well, again, this film has a lot of nice premises to it and a whole new fresh approach to the zombie apocalypse sort of film, where the premise is more or less on a public transportation system that is on its way over to a safe haven, but then eventually gets overrun by the undead itself. And man, the loads of zombies in this film are insane. It's almost like Dead Rising level when it comes to extreme zombie count. I tell you, when you got films or other sorts of media that has massive amounts of zombies like that, then you know you're in for a ride. Because the stakes are very much raised. You got the undead, who are typically stronger, faster moving, and more terrifying and intimidating in appearance and by ability. that can do whatever they can to basically get to you at any cost. So, again, that probably does help make up for this little problem here, this flaw, where our main hero dies right at the very end right there. But you know what though? I guess anything had to be done in order to ensure that some of our other main characters in the film end up surviving and making it to their final destination. So, when it comes to giving this a score, I'd say that, well, for the most part, it has some pretty amazing merits put together and quite a nice charm that I can hardly ever find in most other Korean-based films. I'm going to give this one an 8.1 out of 10. So, pretty much on par with a couple other films. So, it's not necessarily a full-on masterpiece, but it is getting a little close. Because there actually has been talks of a sequel, and as a matter of fact, I might actually have to watch that when it's out. So, at this point, maybe that'll be something else I'll talk about down the line when I get a chance to watch it. Maybe on Netflix or otherwise. But until then, I still got plenty of other things around here to talk about. So, if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.